lights make it impossible for me to see you, but yeah. So I wanted to ask Angie a question. Is there a name for the droplet thing? Drupal icon, like Drupal icon, Drupal. Yeah. I'm just curious. Like, does it have a name? That's all. You know, because I see it around a lot, and I'm like, in that big picture with the 3,500 attendees or whatever in Portland, there's a big inflatable one, and I'm like, it's a really big water droplet. I'm like, what does the water droplet have to do with anything? Is there a water metaphor in Drupal I was missing, or is it a flowing stream of information or something? Or
so
no?
Drupal. Do you want me to?
No, yeah, but Drupal, because it makes a sound like that. Yeah. I haven't done that since I was like 17 in high school. It still works. My cheek still works. Okay, but thank you. I was just always curious. I'm like, wow. So this is the description from the site. You'll notice it says that I'm Christ Dibona. And while I don't doubt the derivation of my first name came from a religious context, I'm not actually an omnipotent super being. And I know that Google can sometimes be a little spooky in what it knows, but it's not derived from any burning bushes or it's servers, technology, and the rest. So I just wanted to point that out. I did notice this yesterday, and I emailed them. I'm like, "There's a typo," but I privately didn't want them to change it. You know? And I'm like, I wonder what they think my middle name is. You know, so I just thought I'd share that with the crowd. And now I'm going to try to attempt to make this go full screen. It's going to be very suspenseful, I assure you. Did it work? Hey, it worked. So I work for a company called Google, and I want to just jump right in. I have a more formal Who Am I slide that I'll get to in a bit. But so do you remember that old comic cartoon on TV where you had a little dog in the time machine, and he said, Sherman set the Wayback Machine to 2004. So imagine I'm the little dog or something. I've lost the metaphor again. But so imagine it's 2004, 2005. I just started at Google, and I took part in a little group that was looking at sort of the state of the computer industry. Our founders and Eric Schmidt were wondering sort of like what sort of barriers existed between us and the users of Google. Search at the time, we weren't in all these other things that we are in today. And they had this perception, and I think it was accurate, that the internet represented this really sort of platonic ideal for fair and open competition. And that if you look at what Google was, it was this thing that sits on top of this thing called the internet, crawls it, analyzes it, tries to figure out where information is and presents it to our users. And our ad system is actually pretty much the exact same thing. You know, our advertisers would say, hey, I want to attract people who are interested in Naturino shoes for their kids or something. And then we'd try to figure out where the best place to show that ad was, who was really interested in that ad, and show it to them. So we asked ourselves, okay, so how did this happen, and how can this persist? You know, if you look at the early 90s, from whence the internet came, why did the internet take off the way it did? And if you look at the early 90s and you say, okay, you know, why didn't people create apps, for instance, that ran on desktop machines at the time? At the time, it was about 93, 94% Windows desktops. You know, they had the big monopoly. And if you were a developer and you were creating something for those desktops, for users, you people, and you were successful, you had found some program, some niche, something that people wanted, you would be presented with this choice by the very large software companies of the day. They'd be like, well, let's see. You're doing really well. Congratulations. We would like to do well with your program, so we'd like to purchase you. Or we will compete with you. And we'll do so in such a way that it'll be very, very difficult for you to compete with us. And very few companies made it out of that time successfully. Oracle did. Intuit did. A number of game companies did. Games were kind of different. But if you were a utility or an application maker, it was a pretty grim future for you. And then the web came out. And what the web did is it said to everybody, listen, you can reach your users very, very easily. You can create content for your users very, very easily. You can find out how other people do this very, very easily through uSource, which we all know about. And that was pretty exciting. And at the same time, and this is the key thing that really is one of the reasons why we're all here. As the internet grew, open source grew with it. And as open source grew, the internet grew with it. And I think there was this really wonderful competition going on between, so suppose I'm a tea company, or pick your favorite business, and I want to put up a website. Back in the mid-90s, I would say, okay, maybe I know nothing about open source, and I would go to the Microsofts, the Suns, the whoever of the day, and say, I want to stand up a website. And they'd be like, well, we have a fabulous solution for you. It's very inexpensive, da-da-da-da. And you can serve 1-2 users. If you want to have more users of your website, of course, you'll need to buy more client access licenses. And so per person, call it $99 per person, you'll be fine. And you're like, wait a second, hey. So you're saying that everyone who comes to my website I have to pay for every person who comes to my website. I have to pay you for every person who comes to my website. Yeah, that's how it's done. That's how we do it. And that didn't really scale. And people weren't really that interested in that. And so then they'd find other providers of web servers that would do larger bulk deals, or they wouldn't have a user cap. And so this whole discussion was going on, and it took years for commercial companies to figure out pricing and all the rest. And in the meantime, the web was still growing. People were still using web browsers. They were still wanting to go find their local tea shop, or did I lose the laptop here? Uh-huh. Wait, okay, good. Aaron's like, what did you do? You broke it. And so, of course, we know about the rise of Apache and all the rest. So, okay, so Apache rose up, and it's like, okay, so Apache was competing against IIS and Suns, whatever, and these other smaller web servers. And of course, Apache, we all know, did extremely well. But I think the reason it did well was not just because it was a great technical solution, but also because it was there for people to use. And there was no friction for them to use it. And because of this, and because of this very important thing, the web grew up into this thing where the serving infrastructure, almost universally, became a combination of open source competing with commercial for user demand, for user fitness, for user utility. And if the user was a person who wanted to serve the web, or serve FTP, or serve email, there were always competing commercial and open source offerings. And in those, we ended up not getting, and with all props to Hurley, who swears a lot, we weren't getting screwed because they were competing with each other for us, right? And that was a very good thing. So how do we persist as a company was the question in 2004 in a world where that's true. How do we keep the world like that? And if you remember, I just said all this stuff. And if that's me, whatever. I'll get to that. I'll jump around a lot. So, and if you look at 2005, 2004's mobile market, what you had was Symbian with like 80-some% of the market. You had a little bit of Windows Mobile, like a smidge. I don't know what the technical math term for smidge, but it was less than like 0.5% or whatever. And you had a lot of RIM, all right? And then you had some Sony Ericsson, you had some other little bitsy, smartphone operating systems out there, but there was no real impact. But it was mostly Symbian. And if you wanted to get onto Symbian, you would have to, first of all, program unusually things like WAP and WML. Raise your hand if you remember these horrible, horrible abstractions, yeah? So they're all like, don't say that around me. You already said a couple of things today, but that's not one that we will take. This is the South. We remember WML. Yeah, I still want to make like a Civil War joke. We consider WML to be the war of Eastern aggression or something. I don't know. It came out of Finland, and we will never forgive it, but then Linux came from Finland, so we're okay with it. So Finland's okay by us. So I'm assuming WML came out of Finland just because of Symbian. But to get on those browsers, on those early smartphones, you had to cut deals with carriers, you had to cut deals with handset manufacturers, you had to basically pay money. yeah, or frankly dedicate significant resources to make that happen. And it was not like the web, where anyone could stand up anything. It was not like the web at all. It was very much like early 90s desktop computing. And we knew that was bad, and we knew it had to change, because accessing the web is something that people expect. And so if it was going to change, we wanted to make sure it changed so it looked like the web, right? So it looked like the Apache competitive landscape. It looked like that. And so, of course, the right answer then is, of course, we need a truly open source, cell phone operating system. Well, duh, right? And so that's where the whole impetus for Android came from. At the same time, a man by the name of Andy Rubin was shopping around a very small startup by the name of Android. And it was him and about 5 other people, and they had done some first passes on a cell phone operating system. And their pitch was a funny one. Andy was going around saying, I want to make one last cell phone operating system. He had done equivalent mobile operating systems at General Magic. He had done Danger, and he'd been basically doing mobile stuff since before we would really call it mobile, hardware as well as software. So, and and the thing about Andy, you got to realize he has the best domain names in the business. He's got robot.net, he's got android.com. And so he was shopping Android around. And he was looking for funding at the time, and we're like, you know what? You're right. You should write one more open source cell phone operating system, but we're just going to buy you. And we're going to staff you up, and we're going to incentivize you, because we want this too. We want it bad. And Andy said, okay. And we all got together, and as you know, that's sort of where Android started within Google. And of course, we got a vibe from Apple about the coming iPhone. And so we knew that there would be other competitors in the cell phone operating system. But we also knew that without an open source competitor, without one that would give that level of flexibility to the market, we would end up just, again, in what we already knew to be a bad situation in the early 90s desktop market. So how did we make Android more like the internet and less like what would become smartphones? So we took a couple of really interesting approaches, and I'm going to talk about that now, because that's why you have me up here. So first of all, we wanted to make it based on open standards whenever possible. We weren't going to go to you and say, you need to program this in Android ML. Okay, we were going to try to avoid that whenever it was practical to do it. In some cases, it wasn't practical to do that. So, for instance, when you would be programming applications for the device, we wanted to be very possible for you to do things like, suppose you're a developer. I don't know you. I'm assuming you like software. So if you're a developer and you're creating an email program, for instance, and a user says, what's your name? Bryant. Well, it's good to meet you, Bryant. Good program. And I want to try Brian's program for email. I don't want to use the Gmail or the other apps, or K9 Mail. I want to use Brian's app. So you download that from the App Store and App Store, whatever, and then it says to the operating system, you know what? I handle email. An operating system, that's cool. I dig that. And then you go to send an email you click on some email address in some web page or whatever, and then the program says, hey, I need to send an email. And the operating system says, you know what? You have a choice. Bryant's email program is here now. Do you want to use that instead? Do you want to use it just once? Do you want to use it always? What do you want to do? And you as the user can pick this. And you say, well, I want to try out Brian's mail program, so I downloaded it. And you try it out and poof, you're done. But that whole intent system is extremely unique to Android. You don't get that in other platforms. Similarly, you could say, I want to take a picture, and it says, well, we have a camera app built in, but you downloaded Instagram or something, whatever your hipster photo application that will make everyone all sepia toned. Awesome, more power to you. So then you can choose that as your camera application. Or if you want to share something, you'd share it. However you like sharing things, whether it's Facebook or FriendFace or Friendster or MySpace, whatever your thing is. FriendFace is a joke. It's not a real thing. How many of you know what I'm talking about when I say FriendFace? Look up FriendFace sometime. It was this IT crowd show, and it's really gross. It's like a huge, no, what did they say it was? It's like a disease, and yeah, it's like this horrible disease metaphor, and they're like, we're not using the disease metaphor anymore. That's over. It's FriendFace. Yeah. So I'm not really a social networking person. But then so we did the intent system, and then we did a couple of other things which I'll talk about. But for this open source crowd, you have to realize why we picked Apache. Okay, we picked Apache very, very specifically because it has a patent grant on there, and that patent grant says, here you go. Here's this cell phone operating system. And any patents that we have, and Google does have a huge number of patents because we're in that fight all the time, but any patents that we have that read on this code in Android, and these are real patents, these aren't like some Joe crappy patents. If you take our code and use it, you're getting a grant with them. And your users get that grant, and so on and so forth. And you get to keep it so long as you don't sue us for that code, against those patents. And then we get to use those patents in our defense. But we don't get to exercise them against you aggressively. We don't get to charge you for them, right? And that's pretty amazing. And that's honestly what has led to the explosion of Android devices in places where we never really, I mean, it's easy to say we didn't expect them. We knew there would be fridges. Well, anyone who says we didn't expect an Android fridge is lying. We all knew that would happen. People always make fridges with crap on them. Excuse my language. Although that's like 1/10 of a Hurley, right? Saying crap, so whatever. 1/100th, really, right? I mean, Todd, I don't know if you're in the front. You said I should swear as much as William did? No? Less? Oh, all right. Anyway, but yeah, everyone knew there would be a fridge. But, I did see a microwave, and I'm like, a microwave? Really? A microwave? I've seen toasters running Android, cars, of course, and it's just very strange. But we knew it would proliferate, but we sort of didn't really appreciate what that would mean. This is an older number. It's more than 1 million devices are activated daily. And what we say by activated on this slide is those are ones that are just talking to Google. So that doesn't include like the Kindle Fire, the Index phones, the whatchamacallit, the Baidu stuff, the random fractional phones that are made in factories when they're not making the other phone they're making or whatever. And so, you can just figure out whatever your ratio is. I always figured it was about between 10 to 20% are not registering with Google. So, I mean, it's an astonishing number of devices that are being activated and are running Android every day. And that was intentional. This was not something we didn't want. This was something we explicitly wanted because we also knew that something unusual would happen if we were successful with Android. We knew that if Android was successful, and it seems like we are very successful and we're shipping about 80% of the market right now on a day-to-day basis, we knew that we needed to compete with ourselves, and the only way to do that is via open source. So we now have Android basically competing with Android, competing with Google, and competing with Amazon, and competing with Yandex, and competing with Baidu. And that's really, really good, because again, when we're all incentivized to compete for you, we're not competing against each other in ways that are anti-competitive, that are wrong, morally and ethically wrong, and it's really pretty great. And we've done this all the way with how we're handling app stores and all the rest. Just like an app store is just really an intent. If you want to install a piece of software, you can do that. You can click unknown sources on pretty much any phone. There are some phones that lock down unknown sources, but even in those cases, you still have access to the ADB interfaces for installing programs. Even the what you would consider a very locked down phone by a carrier, you can still do ridiculous things via the ADB interface. And I haven't seen people do that so much because unknown sources is almost always enabled in like 99.99% of the phones. But that means that you can run other app stores. You can run the Amazon App Store, you can run the Yandex App Store, whatever. We tried to make sure that Android would always give you enough rope for you to hang yourself with, and also for you to have freedom with. Because we're criticized for people basically clicking that button and installing pirated APKs, for instance. And it's like, well, they've chosen to do this. So it's always a weird world when we get into that thing. But yeah, you can replace home screens, lock screens, voicemail systems, dialers, you name it. And it was designed for that to happen. And we knew that people wouldn't do it in the beginning, but when we got popular, the Facebook phone has basically replaced home screen. We replaced launcher. And these are all good and intentional things. So talked about this a bit. Play Store is currently sitting at around 1 million apps, I think. You know, and you know, probably the most prominent non-Google App Store is the Kindle store. Seems to be the most popular one. There's the F Phone store, which is the free Droid one, which is just free software programs. So if you're dead serious about you don't want anything that commercial, you go to the free Droid stuff, and they have their own builds of Android for unlocked devices. So yeah, and that's kind of long and short of it. You know, I think I've already taken my half hour. I don't want to like get too far into it because I don't want to like ruin your break. You know, I got about 5 minutes. But you know, it's funny when you release something like Android. Sometimes you're a little surprised at what people do to accomplish to compete with it. So, for instance, when early in the WebOS days, and certainly later in RIM's recent developments, they were like, well, our next RIM devices are just going to run Android apps. And it's like, okay. And basically what they did is they ran Dalvik and the frameworks and the rest on top of their operating system. And then RIM recently said, you know what, we're just going to run RIM on top of Android. And it's like, okay. And they just came out with their BlackBerry app. And there's nothing in the operating system that keeps them from doing this. And so it's really interesting that when people approach that. A lot of people don't know this, but the very first time we shared the Android source code, it had x86 inside it as well as ARM. But it's very easy to port. People have ported it to MIPS, to Power, to ARM, to, of course, x86 and various flavors of that. So it's been very, very easy to do. It was designed for this from the very beginning. It's funny because when we first released Android, we actually specifically released it for x86 and ARM so that we would know it could be done, and sort of it became inculcated in how Android was done so that it wasn't lost. And this is one of the big controversies around the native development kit, because most native development kit users target ARM, and we're like, you know, you really need to target x86 too, and they're like, yeah, whatever, get out of our face. But you know, that's people for you. So yeah, so it's an extremely portable app. I don't need to really talk about that. There was something else I wanted to mention. Oh, constant releasing. So, for instance, people often criticize Android that we don't release as often or we don't release as much in the public sphere, which is a totally legit thing to complain about. But we've averaged something like 6 releases a year since the very beginning of it. We did 3 in just shy of October. We have like sort of a dead period in the summer, but between March and October we had 3 different releases of 3 different cuts of Jelly Bean that came out, and it's ice cream sandwich, Jelly Bean, yeah, Jelly Bean, and you know, Kit Kat's coming. So what's that? When? Oh, in the future. So yeah, yes. So in the future, and that's sort of the world of Android, and that's sort of what I'm going to share with you, where it came from, where it is right now. You know, we ship other stuff too, Chrome OS, you know. Yeah. So I wanted to mention this, especially in light of the last talk from Angie and Jessica. You know, we run the Summer of Code in Google Conan, and if you're not familiar with that, please become familiar with it, because I'm sure you have friends who could take part in these programs, either as mentors or as students or as high schoolers even, for the Coden. And it's pretty wonderful. It's a great way to get real experience with computer science for young developers, and it's a really great way for open source projects to open themselves up to new developers. And a core part of that is you know, women and minority. And it's funny when I say minority, I really mean, you know, non-typical minority participation in open source. And you know, like Angie mentioned, the participation rates for women in open source have been really low compared to the participation rates for computer science as a whole, which is between 16 and 20%, depending on how you measure it. And you know, the best we've seen in open source projects usually hovers around 10, but it's usually way less. So for the Summer of Code and Google Coden, starting many years ago, we were like, how can we attract more women? How can we, you know, do this? And you know, our goal is to hit double-digit participation next year for our 10th anniversary. And it's hard because we hit, like, I think it was 9% this year for Summer of Code, which is the best year ever for us. But we need more participation from people who do not typically take part in open source software. And the reason for that is not because I'm the most egalitarian person in the world, but because it means we're leaving a lot of talent on the table. And then they go do something else, you know, and that's a shame. And it's a great loss for people who care about free software and about open development. So that's a speech. That's my half hour. And I'll stick around in the break for a little while, and you can come talk and we can chat. So thanks.